What's up, everybody? Ryan Thomas, live on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Just wrapped up with Tim of the Game On Sports and Game On Buffalo, Timothy Segru. Hopefully I said that right. If I didn't, me and Tim, I was talking to him on the phone before the show, and I'm like, "What? How do you pronounce it?" I'm not good at pronouncing last names today. That's just not my strength today. But Timothy Segru, definitely enjoyed having him on. We talked about his brand, Game On Sports, Game On Buffalo, the brand that he represents, and all the stuff that's going on within that brand. There's a lot to talk about within that brand, and there's a lot to talk about as far as the Buffalo Bills and Buffalo Sabres and just the city of Buffalo right now. A true revitalization of the city. Downtown Buffalo, Western New York is booming, and it's doing really well right now. And I wanted to have Tim on to talk about that, discuss that, dive into that, and much, much more. So thank you to Tim for coming on and giving me a really great interview. So thank you to him. Onward and upward, though, I have a big fight that I have to talk about. I've previewed the fight once before with Ty B of Trainwreck Sports. Needed to preview the fight once again. Daniel Cormier, Stipe Miocic, August 17th. This fight goes down live on ESPN Plus pay-per-view. If you don't know how to get the fight, you'd have to subscribe to ESPN Plus and buy the pay-per-view. So I think the pay-per-views right now are $59.99. And that's pay-per-view that you definitely want to tune into, because this main event is the biggest fight of the summer. There's no question, no doubt. Daniel Cormier and Stipe Miocic 2 is the biggest fight that this summer has to offer. For the biggest title, the World Heavyweight Championship, whether it's boxing or MMA, that allure has never worn off of that title. The World Heavyweight Championship, the granddaddy of them all. The big men getting in the octagon to swap punches, swap kicks, swap takedowns, and find out, was the first fight a fluke? Was it a fluke? Did Daniel Cormier get away with one there? Can Stipe Miocic reclaim his glory at heavyweight? Can he get his belt back? Can Daniel Cormier continue his glory as a heavyweight? And boy, has Daniel Cormier had a glorious run at heavyweight. I think one of the dynamics of Daniel Cormier's career that is so often overlooked is the fact that he hasn't lost to anyone but John Jones. Those are the two fights that really stand out for people. The one no contest ultimately at UFC 214, and then the first fight back in UFC, I believe it was 178, 179, where Jones fought Cormier, or was scheduled to fight Cormier. I can't even remember when they actually fought. The fight odyssey between Jones and Cormier the first time was unlike anything. Never seen anything like it. And for Cormier, I watched the new E60 that really dove into his life, and what a journey he has had as a young man, losing a daughter at the age of 23. Cormier was 23. His daughter was only a couple months old. She died in a car accident, tragically, obviously, and just hearing him talk about that just really puts it in perspective how much of a journey this has been for Cormier, how the road has never been a smooth one. There's been some bumps in the road. The path has been a journey, to say the least. And I think in order for anyone to achieve anything in life, there has to be adversity, because then you don't feel like you've achieved anything. If you go through life and life is easy and you get everything handed to you, then you're really not achieving anything. Whereas Daniel Cormier, the path that he chose as an athlete, as a wrestler turned MMA fighter at the age of 30, he chose the path that many people would not choose. Many people within the sport of wrestling at that time that were better than him. Guys like Cael Sanderson, as an amateur wrestler, was a guy that wrestled Daniel Cormier 6 times, beat him all 6 times. So Daniel Cormier, I think, due to the fact that he hadn't really achieved that true glory of being that number one guy, never got that that title, not that gold medal. He never touched it. Not that NCAA gold medal. None of it. He always was second fiddle to someone. And I think that thirst, that hunger for glory is what made his career what it is today. And I think that was a thought that I had prior to watching the E60 documentary, but even after watching it now, it really set the tone in my mind that Daniel Cormier is one of the best of all time, to endure and to go through every which thing that he has gone through as an athlete and as a man, to still be standing with a belt wrapped around his waist, a belt wrapped around his shoulder, whatever you want to call it. It's remarkable. And I remember when I first heard the news that Stipe Miocic was going to defend his title against Daniel Cormier, I thought to myself, Stipe should beat this guy. Stipe was knocking out Alistair Overeem. Stipe defeated the most hyped up, dangerous fighter, I think, in recent UFC history, in Francis Ngannou. And he beat Junior Dos Santos, defended the belt 3 times, more than any other heavyweight had ever defended that heavyweight UFC belt before. So Daniel Cormier coming up from 205 pounds, the guy that couldn't beat John Jones, I'm expecting him to beat Stipe Miocic. That's a tall order. That's a lot to ask of me as a fan to convince myself that that's what would happen. But that is what happened. Daniel Cormier stepped into that octagon. He knocked out Stipe Miocic in the first round, and there was a moment in the first round that was very controversial. Moment in which Daniel Cormier did poke Stipe Miocic in the eye, and I think Stipe was loopy from it. I think it really threw off his senses, really changed the whole dynamic of that fight, because moments after Stipe was poked in the eye, he was then knocked out. DC kind of knew that he was a little bit rattled and got on him and clinched him and threw a hellacious elbow that sent Miocic crashing to the canvas, and then Cormier followed that up with plenty of hammer fists, a few too many hammer fists allowed by the ref there. Even if it was 1 or 2, enough was enough. But seeing Stipe crash to the canvas like that, you knew he was knocked out. But Cormier won the fight, and Stipe campaigned so rigorously for that rematch. He wanted that rematch. He wanted that second shot at Cormier, and it eluded him. The UFC put together Daniel Cormier and Derek Lewis. The UFC was trying to put together Daniel Cormier versus Brock Lesnar, which would have been a massive, massive fight that I definitely would have liked to have seen just for my fandom, but for rankings reasons and reasons of the actual sacredness of that UFC heavyweight title, it's probably for the best that fight didn't happen, that Brock Lesnar did retire, which would then pave the way for Stipe Miocic to get this second shot at getting his belt back. And I've never heard a guy more motivated. I've never heard a guy more hungry. I've never heard a guy more calm about that than Stipe Miocic. There's a lot of pressure on Stipe in this fight. There's a lot of pressure on DC in this fight. I think this is one of those few fights where both fighters have equal amount of pressure, and the stakes are at an all-time high. This is the biggest fight of Daniel Cormier's career. This is the biggest fight of Stipe Miocic's career. Bigger than John Jones, because if Daniel Cormier steps in there on next Saturday night on August 17th, live on pay-per-view in front of the whole world, and loses this belt in devastating fashion, it would be a sad end to a remarkable journey and a triumphant return for the new 2-time UFC heavyweight champ Stipe Miocic. But if Daniel Cormier wins and beats Stipe Miocic again, he will cement himself, in my opinion, as the greatest UFC heavyweight ever. And that goes back to my statement. I'll pause there. If Daniel Cormier can beat Stipe Miocic again, he's the greatest UFC heavyweight of all time. And the reason I say that is because Daniel Cormier, as I alluded to earlier, has never lost to anyone but John Jones. Those two fights were at light heavyweight. If there's one thing that Daniel Cormier and Stipe Miocic taught me as an avid fan, as a guy that's viewed thousands upon thousands of fights through his UFC fandom, is that Daniel Cormier is a completely different entity at heavyweight than he is at light heavyweight. At heavyweight, Daniel Cormier can weigh as much as 265 pounds. At light heavyweight, Daniel Cormier has to weigh pre-fight as little as 205 pounds. He has to be 205 pounds. If he's over that, if he's 205.5, he's not fighting for that belt. He's overweight. He gets an hour by the commission standards to lose that half pound and then get to that weight. But if Cormier is cutting down as a big-bodied guy from heavyweight weight range, we'll just say his walk-around weight is 240. He's losing 35 pounds to fight John Jones, not once but twice. Fight Volkan Oezdemir, fight Anthony Rumble Johnson, fight Alexander Gustafsson. That's a tall order, and it's an order that Daniel Cormier doesn't really have to meet anymore. And for all the chatter about whether or not Daniel Cormier will fight John Jones again, they can fight again. If they want to fight again, it's big business. It's a fight I'd watch. No doubt about that. No doubt about that. But if they fight again, do it at heavyweight. That is where Daniel Cormier is at his best. Daniel Cormier is a heavyweight. He is not a light heavyweight. Daniel Cormier is a heavyweight. He's 39 years old. Let's face it, he's not in the, he's not in the best. The eye test shows us he does not look like Francis Ngannou out there. He's the Pillsbury Doughboy. I love the guy. I think that in itself makes him even more remarkable. Is that Daniel Cormier, if you were to see him on the street, you would think that he was just your average science teacher. But instead, he's this all-time great amateur wrestler, UFC fighter, UFC champion. And I think that's what makes him that much more entertaining to watch, is that you see this guy in the octagon, you think, wow, doesn't really have a lot to him. He's pretty fat. He doesn't look the part. But you watch him put his hands up, you know that he's ready for something. He throws punches really hard at heavyweight, throws kicks really hard at heavyweight. That weight difference for Daniel Cormier is crucial. And I think that is another layer to this whole story that I think favors Daniel Cormier. He might be shorter in height, but Daniel Cormier has fought opponents that are far bigger than him. Don't forget he fought Bigfoot Silva. Don't forget he fought Josh Barnett. Don't forget he fought Frank Mir. Don't forget he fought John Jones, obviously, twice. Stipe Miocic once, now twice. So Daniel Cormier is an anomaly. There will never be another. And I say that knowing that I have previously somewhat criticized him due to the fact that I feel like he gets too lost in the promotion of it, and sometimes it doesn't come off as genuine. I guess it's a lot easier said than done when you hate your opponent as much as Daniel Cormier hates John Jones, as much as John Jones hates Daniel Cormier. That's just the way it is. But I think Cormier is favored in this fight. I think this is a fight that he should win due to the fact that he won it the first time. I don't know where Stipe could get better as far as in comparison to the first fight. And I don't know where Daniel Cormier could get worse. I think Daniel Cormier has to fight this fight strategically. He has to fight this fight as if it's X's and O's. He's got to come with a strategic game plan of getting Stipe down on the ground and pounding his face in for 25 minutes or until he gives up. Or look for the submission along the way. That's what DC's game plan should be. Stipe's game plan is pretty well known. He's going to try to come forward. He's going to try to land punches. He's going to try to knock out Daniel Cormier and really embarrass him like Cormier embarrassed him about a year and a half ago. Make no mistake about it, this is the biggest fight of the summer. This is the one, the heavyweight title, the big Mac Daddy title. And as far as how these guys' attributes measure up, I mean, Cormier's the better wrestler. Cormier is the better clinch fighter. Maybe Stipe has more power, but Daniel Cormier has a granite chin. You saw what I saw. You saw John Jones hit Daniel Cormier with a flush head kick. It took John Jones about 30 seconds after that to finish that fight, where most people that are kicked that hard in the head, flush, are out on their feet cold, where Daniel Cormier was wobbled. That just goes to show you how much of a tough SOB Daniel Cormier is inside that octagon. This is going to be a great fight. This is the best fight of the summer. You have to tune into it. This is the one that you need to circle on your calendar because the card itself is a barn burner. Nate Diaz, Anthony Pettis, the two most just balls to the wall strikers in UFC history, I think, in their generation. Anthony Pettis, former champ. Nate Diaz, former number one contender. You get the point. At 170, that is a layer to this fight as well that is just, it cannot be overstated. Weight in this fight, the weight of this fight, and the fact that the weight plays a factor in this fight between Cormier and Miocic. As far as Stipe goes, I think it's to his detriment that he didn't fight another opponent, that he did wait for the rematch. I think he should have got in there with somebody else before fighting Cormier again. I get it. I get why he didn't want to. He's the most accomplished UFC heavyweight champ of all time. But ring rust is real when you're fighting the elite of the elite. I think Daniel Cormier is going to try to take him down, try to hurt him, and finish the fight. And that's my prediction. I think Cormier is going to win this one. If not, Miocic is going to knock out Daniel Cormier. I'm Ryan Thomas. This was my preview and prediction of Daniel Cormier versus Stipe Miocic. Daniel Cormier, a true legend in the sport. Fellas, ladies, this might be the last time we ever see DC compete. If DC beats Miocic via knockout again or finishes him in any way, I think it could set the stage for DC versus Jones 3. Whether it's light heavyweight or heavyweight really remains to be seen and remains the biggest question mark in the sport of MMA. Take care, everybody.